There is a moment in every live taping, every veteran of the studio floor will tell you this, when the show stops being a show. When something slips through the controlled machinery of cameras and cue cards and hit your mark, and in 3, 2, 1, and becomes something else entirely. Something that no one in the building planned for and nobody could have scripted. Steve Harvey had felt that shift before. He knew what it felt like when the air in the room changed. He did not know on a Wednesday afternoon in November 2023 that it was coming. He was in the middle of a between-round transition, cards in hand, already framing the next question in his head, when one of the stagehands, a man named Marcus, who had worked on the show for 9 years and in all those 9 years had never once stepped out of his lane, never once interrupted a taping, never done anything to draw attention to himself, crossed from the edge of the set to where Steve was standing. Marcus leaned in. He said something, 11 words, quiet enough that the boom microphones did not catch them and the studio audience did not hear them. Steve Harvey's face changed, not dramatically, not the way faces change in the movies, with a sharp intake of breath and wide eyes. The way faces change in real life, slowly, from the inside out, as the information moves from the ear to the brain to whatever place a person keeps the things that matter most. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the man standing on the left side of the stage. He looked back at Marcus. Then he put his cards on the podium. The studio, which had been humming with the energy of a game in progress, went quiet with the automatic attentiveness of an audience that has been in these rooms long enough to know what it means when a man like Steve Harvey sets his cards down and does not reach for them again. Something was about to happen that none of them had come here for. Something true was about to push through the surface of an ordinary afternoon. Robert Callahan had been a firefighter in Cincinnati, Ohio for 32 years. He went by Bobby. He had gone by Bobby since the first day at Engine 14, when his captain had looked at his paperwork, looked at him, and said, "Robert is a lot of name for a guy your size." Bobby was 5'10", solid, but not enormous. The kind of build that suggested endurance rather than spectacle. The nickname stuck. For 3 decades, every dispatcher and every colleague and every neighbor whose cat he had gotten out of a tree and every kid who had toured the station on a school field trip had called him Bobby. He had joined the Cincinnati Fire Department at 26. After 2 years of construction work and a moment of clarity that he could not entirely explain even now, a moment where he had looked at what he was doing and understood, without ceremony, that it was not the thing he was supposed to be doing. He put in his application on a Tuesday. He never second-guessed it. 32 years. Roughly 12,000 shifts. More fires than he could count and would not try to, because counting was not the point. The point was the work. The point was showing up and doing it, and going home and coming back and doing it again. Bobby Callahan was not the kind of man who collected his own history. He was the kind of man who cleared it away each morning and went back to the station. His wife Linda had loved him for exactly this quality, and been exasperated by it in equal measure for 31 years of marriage. She was the one who kept the scrapbook, the newspaper clippings, the department commendations, the photograph from the year he made lieutenant, the letter from the mayor's office after the warehouse fire on the east side in 2011, where he had gone back in twice. Bobby did not know what was in the scrapbook, and did not ask. The scrapbook was Linda's project, and Linda's business, and he trusted her with both. He had retired 2 years ago at 56. The paperwork side of it had been easy. The psychological side of it, the recalibration of waking up in the morning without somewhere to be that mattered, had been harder, in the way that things are harder when you have organized your identity around a purpose for 30 years and the purpose suddenly has an end date. He had gotten through it the way he got through most things, by focusing on what was in front of him, which, in the last 2 years, had been primarily his grandson Tyler. Tyler was 18. He was Bobby's daughter Nicole's son, a sharp, funny, already taller than Bobby kid with his father Derek's jawline and his grandmother Linda's eyes, and a laugh that filled whatever room he was in. Tyler was leaving for Ohio State in the fall to study engineering. He was the first person in the extended Callahan family to go to a 4-year university, and the fact that he had done it on an academic scholarship was something Bobby allowed himself to be privately and enormously proud of. Tyler had been obsessed with Family Feud since he was 12. He had watched it with Bobby and Linda on Friday evenings, the three of them in the living room with Tyler running the scoring on his phone and arguing loudly with every answer that was not his. He had been the one to say, "When Bobby retired, Grandpa, we should apply. Before I leave for college, we should do something." Bobby had said yes, because Tyler asked him to. It was as simple as that. Bobby Callahan did not want to be on television. He did not have a bucket list. He had no interest in being seen or recognized for things he had already done and considered complete. But Tyler had asked, and Linda had looked at him with the expression that meant she agreed with Tyler, and there was very little in the world that could move Bobby Callahan except the people he loved. So he had said yes. He had no idea that a stagehand named Marcus Webb had spent the night before the taping going through a box of his mother's belongings and finding a newspaper clipping. He had no idea that Marcus Webb existed. He had no idea that on a November evening in 1998, when he and his crew from Engine 14 had responded to a house fire on Westwood Avenue in Cincinnati, the woman he had carried down a collapsing staircase with her hair on fire and her arms already burning had had an 18-year-old son standing on the sidewalk outside who had watched the whole thing and never stopped seeing it. He had wondered about her, that woman. Over the years, in the way that firefighters carry the ones they cannot verify, the ones they hand to paramedics and then go back into the smoke without time to ask for names. He had told Linda once, quietly, maybe 10 years after the fact, that there was a woman from a fire on Westwood Avenue he had never found out about. That he hoped she was okay. Linda had taken his hand and not said anything, which was the right response and the reason he had told her. He had never found out. He was 58 years old. He had been carrying that not knowing for 25 years. He did not know, standing on the left side of the Family Feud stage in his matching Callahan family shirt, that the not knowing was about to end. Marcus Webb had worked on the Family Feud production crew for 9 years. He was 44 years old, compact, efficient, the kind of man who anticipates what needs to happen next and is already positioned for it before anyone asks. He had been on sets since he was 22, working his way from production assistant to camera grip to his current role managing the stage floor. He knew this set the way a musician knows a particular instrument, every sight line, every cable, every mark on the floor that a contestant was supposed to hit. He was not a man who talked about himself at work. His colleagues knew his name and his coffee order and that he coached youth basketball on Tuesday evenings. They did not know about his mother. They did not know about the fire. His mother, Diane Webb, had been 40 years old in November 1998. She had lived alone in a house on Westwood Avenue in Cincinnati. Marcus, then 18, had been living with his grandmother 2 miles away during a period of family disruption that had eventually resolved but took time to do so. Diane had called him that afternoon to say she was making his favorite soup for Sunday, and did he want to come over? He had said yes. He had gone to bed that night, meaning to call her back with a time. At 2:17 in the morning, his grandmother's phone rang. It was a neighbor. The house on Westwood Avenue was on fire. Marcus had dressed in 30 seconds. He had run the 2 miles through dark streets in November, in socks and no coat because he had forgotten his coat, the way the body runs when the brain does not have time to give instructions. He had arrived to find 3 fire trucks and his mother on a stretcher on the sidewalk, conscious, her arms wrapped in dressings that were already showing through with red, her hair gone on one side. She was alive. She was looking at the sky and talking to a paramedic in a voice that was steady in the way voices are steady when the body is still processing what happened to it. Standing next to the stretcher was a firefighter, still in full gear, helmet off, face covered in soot, breathing in the uneven way that people breathe when they have been somewhere the air did not cooperate. He had his hand on Diane's shoulder, not holding it, just resting it there, the way you rest your hand on someone's shoulder when you want them to know someone is present. Marcus had pushed through to his mother. The firefighter had stepped back. By the time Marcus looked up, the man was walking back toward the truck. Marcus had not gotten his name. He had not thought to get his name. He had been 18 and his mother was alive, and that was the entire universe for several hours. Diane Webb had recovered. The burns on her arms had left scars she wore for the rest of her life without self-consciousness. She had talked about that night exactly twice in the years after, once to a church group about faith and once to Marcus. When he was 25 and she had told him, there was a firefighter. He was the first one to get to me. I don't know his name. I want you to know that. She had died of a stroke in 2019, at 61. Marcus had kept the box of her things, her Bible, her jewelry, the cards her children had given her over the years, and a small collection of newspaper clippings. He had not gone through the box completely until the night before the Family Feud taping, when he had been at home unable to sleep and had pulled it from the closet because he wanted to feel close to her. The newspaper clipping was near the bottom. A small article from the Cincinnati Enquirer dated November 14, 1998. West Side House fire leaves one hospitalized. Firefighter credited with rescue. The article was 6 paragraphs. The firefighter's name was in the 3rd paragraph. Robert Bobby Callahan, a 4-year veteran of Engine 14, was credited by Battalion Chief Mark Simmons with the rescue of Diane Webb, 40, of Westwood Avenue. Marcus had read the name twice. Then he had gone to his laptop and searched the Family Feud contestant materials for the following day's taping. The Callahan family. Cincinnati, Ohio, Robert Bobby Callahan, retired firefighter. The family had submitted a photo from his retirement ceremony, Bobby in his dress uniform, the Cincinnati Fire Department patch visible on his left shoulder. Engine 14. Marcus had sat at his kitchen table for a long time. Then he had gone to bed, knowing he would not sleep, and made a decision about what he would do in the morning. He had come to the set the next day and done his job. He had watched Bobby Callahan on that stage, watched him be exactly who he appeared to be, a man who did not know what to do with attention, and responded to Steve Harvey's jokes with a laugh that was genuine and unperformed and slightly surprised. The laugh of a man who finds things funny and is a little startled every time he does. He had watched Bobby's grandson Tyler answer a question and then immediately look at his grandfather, waiting for the old man's verdict, needing it the way 18-year-olds need the approval of the people who raise them, even when they are old enough to not need anything. And somewhere in the second round, Marcus Webb had walked to the floor manager and said he needed 30 seconds with Steve Harvey between questions. In 9 years, Marcus had never asked for anything like this. The floor manager had looked at him for a moment. Then he had nodded. Marcus had crossed the set. He had stood beside Steve Harvey. He had leaned in. He had said 11 words. Steve Harvey looked at Marcus for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at Bobby Callahan on the left side of the stage. At the broad, quiet, slightly uncomfortable man in the matching family shirt, who was the most obviously un-television-ready person on that stage and was somehow, for that exact reason, the most watchable. Steve looked back at Marcus. "What's your name?" he said, quietly enough that the audience did not hear. "Marcus," the stagehand said. "Marcus Webb." Steve Harvey nodded once. He straightened. He looked out at the studio. "Hold on," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. with the particular authority of a man who knows that a room will go quiet when he tells it to, not because of who he is, but because of how he says it. The production team froze. The studio audience went still. Steve turned to the Callahan family. "Bobby," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to bear with me for a minute." Bobby Callahan looked at Steve Harvey with a steady, slightly cautious attention. "Okay," he said. "You were a firefighter for 32 years. "Yes, sir, Engine 14. "Cincinnati, that's right." Steve paused. "Do you remember a fire, November 1998, Westwood Avenue? A woman, house fire. She had burns on both arms." The studio was silent enough that people in the back rows were leaning forward. Bobby Callahan's face did something. It moved, not all at once, but in sequence, the way a man's face moves when a door opens on something he has kept in a room for a long time. His eyes shifted slightly, focused on something that was not in the studio. His jaw, which had been relaxed, tightened briefly. "Yeah," he said. He said it quietly. "I remember." "Tell me what you remember," Steve said. Bobby looked at him for a moment. This was not a man who narrated his own history. He took a breath. "Second floor," he said. "Staircase was already going. I found her in the hallway. She'd been trying to get to the window. Her hair had caught." He paused. "I carried her down, handed her to the paramedics outside. She was conscious." Another pause. "I never found out what happened to her." "You don't always get to find out." He said the last sentence with the flatness of a man stating a fact about a world he accepted. Steve Harvey turned to the edge of the stage. He looked at Marcus. "Marcus," he said. "Come here." Marcus Webb walked onto the Family Feud stage for the first time in 9 years of working on the show. He stopped 5 feet in front of Bobby. Bobby looked at him. "Her name was Diane Webb," Steve said. "This is her son. He was 18 years old the night of the fire. He was on the sidewalk when you brought her out." The information crossed Bobby Callahan's face the way weather crosses an open field, visibly, completely, without anywhere to hide. He looked at Marcus. He looked at him the way a man looks at someone when he is trying to understand the geometry of time, how an 18-year-old on a sidewalk in 1998 becomes a 44-year-old man standing in front of him in a television studio in 2023. "She made it," Bobby said. It was not a question. It was something else, the words a man says when he has been waiting 25 years to say them. "She made it," Marcus said. "She lived until 2019. She talked about that night twice in her whole life. Both times she said there was a firefighter. I don't know his name. I want you to know that she knew someone got to her. She knew that." Bobby Callahan put his hand over his mouth. Just for a moment. Then he lowered it. "I thought about her," he said. His voice was still steady. Firefighters learn to keep their voices steady. It is one of the first professional habits, because it is one of the most necessary ones. Over the years, you don't always get to find out. "I thought about her. She thought about you too," Marcus said. "She kept the newspaper article. I found it last night in a box of her things. That's how I knew your name. That's how I recognized you from the retirement photo in the contestant materials yesterday morning." Steve Harvey had been standing between them, and now he stepped back, one deliberate step, to give the space between the two men room to exist without a mediator. Bobby Callahan extended his hand to Marcus Webb. Marcus looked at it. He shook it. And then, the way his mother had told him twice about the firefighter on Westwood Avenue, he said the thing he had been trying for 25 years to give to a person who did not yet have a name. "Thank you. She was my whole family. You carried her out. Thank you." Bobby received this the way men receive gratitude for things they consider their job, with a slight tensing of the jaw and a nod that was small and precise, and held more than any larger gesture could have. Then he said, "I'm glad she made it. I'm glad she had 20 more years." Marcus nodded. She did. She had good years. Steve Harvey had been in this business for 30 years. He had stood on 1,000 stages and held 1,000 microphones. He knew exactly what this moment did not need from him. He let it breathe. The audience, which had been silent through the entire exchange, found its voice, not in the quick pop of reaction, but in the slow, sustained wave of people who have been moved and are signaling it the only way a crowd can. Bobby's grandson Tyler had been standing 3 spots down the lineup with the expression of a boy who had just seen the full dimensions of a man he thought he already knew completely. Linda Callahan was crying the good kind. Steve Harvey turned to face the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and his voice had the texture of something worn down to its essential grain. "What you just saw is what this show is actually about. Not the game. Not the prize money. This," he gestured at all of it. 2 strangers who have been connected for 25 years and didn't know each other's names. Connected by one man's choice to run into a burning building for someone he would never see again. He looked at Bobby. 32 years, Steve said. "Bobby, how many times did you make that choice? How many people did you carry out of how many buildings?" Bobby shifted his weight slightly. "I don't keep count," he said. "I know you don't," Steve said. "That's exactly why I'm pointing at you." He turned back to the cameras. "There are people in this country right now, today, this afternoon, while we're standing here, running into buildings for strangers, and most of those strangers will never know their names. Most of them will go home and never find out what happened to the person they carried out." Bobby Callahan carried Diane Webb down a burning staircase and then went back to work and spent 25 years not knowing if she lived. He paused. Marcus Webb spent 25 years wanting to thank a man whose name he couldn't find, and today, by the most accidental and beautiful chain of events I have ever witnessed on this stage, they found each other. Right here. He looked at Bobby. "You told me you thought about her. Over the years. That's the part that gets me, Bobby, because most people in your position would have moved on. You moved on and you carried it at the same time. You did your job and you never stopped wondering." He let it sit. Steve turned to the production team. "We're going to finish this game," he said. He looked at Marcus. "And Marcus is going to watch from the front row." The game resumed with the Callahan family on their side of the stage and Marcus Webb seated in the front row. A chair that had been brought out for him by a production assistant who moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood the gravity of the arrangement. Bobby played the rest of the game the way he had played the first 2 rounds, with the unhurried, slightly puzzled competence of a man who had not come here to win, but was winning anyway because he had spent 32 years making good decisions under pressure. Tyler, beside him, was playing with a different energy than before. The kind of energy that arrives when you look at someone you have known your whole life and understand, for the first time, the full weight of who they are. The Callahan family won the main game. Tyler went to the Fast Money podium first and scored 124 points. Bobby, who had never wanted to be here, who had come for his grandson and for Linda and not for himself, stepped to the podium needing only 76 points. He scored 89. When the board revealed the final total and Steve Harvey announced the winner, Tyler crossed the stage and grabbed his grandfather in the particular embrace of an 18-year-old boy who has just been handed something that changes the story he tells about where he comes from. Bobby accepted it with one arm around Tyler's shoulders and the other hand pressed briefly to the back of the boy's head, the gesture of a man who does not often express what he feels and is expressing it now because the moment will not wait. From the front row, Marcus Webb watched Bobby Callahan receive his family's celebration. He watched Tyler look at his grandfather the way you look at someone when you have just learned something that cannot be unlearned. He thought about his mother. He thought about her on the sidewalk, looking at the sky. He thought about her telling him once, when he was 25, there was a firefighter. I want you to know that. He had known it for 25 years. He had just not known where to put it. Now he knew. The episode aired 10 days later. The clip of Marcus crossing the studio floor and the 11 words he had whispered reached 67 million people in the first 48 hours, a number the show's analytics team noted was not just large, but unusually sustained. Most viral clips peak and decay within 24 hours. This one held. People kept sharing it, kept returning to it, kept sending it to specific people with specific intentions. Firefighters shared it within their departments with no caption. Their families shared it with captions that said things like, "This is why I married him and my dad did this for 30 years and nobody sees this part." First responder advocacy organizations used the clip in their communications for the rest of the year. Several fire departments across the country showed it at annual recognition events, not as a feel-good interlude, but as a serious document of what the work costs and means when it is stripped of ceremony and viewed in the plain light of what actually happened to an actual person. Tyler Callahan left for Ohio State 6 months after the taping. Before he went, he sat with Bobby in the garage for an afternoon, the same garage where Bobby kept the equipment from 32 years of firefighting. They did not talk about the show specifically. They talked about Engine 14. Bobby told Tyler things he had not told anyone, small stories, specific moments. The technical details of how fire moves and what you listen for, and how you learn to go toward what other people run from. Tyler recorded it on his phone. He told Bobby he was recording it. Bobby looked at the phone and looked at his grandson and said, "Okay." He went on talking. Tyler has the recording still. He has told people, when they ask about his grandfather, that the most important thing about Bobby Callahan is not the 32 years or the commendations or the retirement ceremony or even the moment on the Family Feud stage. The most important thing is the way he tells a story, with all the drama pulled out of it, all the decorations stripped away, so that what is left is just the sequence of what happened and the choices made inside it. Bobby tells it that way because he learned over 32 years that the story of a fire is not about the firefighter. It is about the person inside. The firefighter is just the thing that connects them. Marcus Webb still works on the Family Feud production crew. He has not changed jobs. He has not left. He goes to the same set, manages the same floor, anticipates the same sequence of camera changes and mark adjustments and between-round transitions that he has anticipated for 9 years. But once a month, on a Sunday, he calls Bobby Callahan. They talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 30. They talk about football and Tyler's engineering coursework and the youth basketball team Marcus coaches and a restaurant in Cincinnati that Bobby swears makes the best chili in Ohio. They do not always talk about the fire. Sometimes they talk about his mother, Bobby asking questions, Marcus answering them, both of them understanding that this is a form of the same work, the work of making sure a person is known. Diane Webb, who kept a newspaper clipping at the bottom of a box of her things and died not knowing the name of the man who carried her out but knowing someone had, is known now, in more rooms than she ever expected to be known in, by people who watched a stagehand cross a studio floor and say 11 words and change the shape of an afternoon. She would have found that surprising and very pleasing in equal measure. Steve Harvey addressed the episode once publicly. He did it on the show before the credits rolled, sitting on the edge of the stage. "I want to say one thing about what happened here today," he said. "And it's this," he looked at the camera. "The people who save us don't always get to know that they did. And we don't always get to thank the people who saved us. Most of the time, the two sides of that moment never find each other. Most of the time, Bobby Callahan carries Diane Webb down a staircase and never finds out what happened next, and Marcus Webb looks for a name he doesn't have and can't find it. Most of the time. He paused. Today was not most of the time. Today, a man who has worked on this show for 9 years saw a photo in a production file and recognized a firefighter's patch and held it together long enough to walk across a stage and tell me 11 words. Another pause. I want you to think about that. Not about me. Not about the game. About Marcus. About what it takes to carry something for 25 years and then, when the moment comes, not to freeze, to walk across the floor and say it. He stood up. That's the show, he said. That's what the show is for.